know already that when the Bible talks about the high places, there were altars to pagan gods on the high places. So Elijah took the battle to their site and the prophets of Baal. He came up to battle them on their territory. So this is where it happened. And you'll want to listen to that. It's an awesome lesson. It's very powerful. But we're going to be talking about the Shunammite woman. So if you want to turn your Bibles to 2 Kings 4, we hear about Shunem only in a few places in the Bible. It was the land given to the tribe of Issachar. And then in 1 Samuel 28:4, it's where the Philistines and Saul consulted the witch of Endor. So they set up camp there at Shunem, and Saul consulted the witch of Endor there. So it's sort of an interesting place. But if you'll turn with me, we'll start reading about the Shunammite woman. She's one of those awesome women in the Bible that we don't know her name. And there are a few of them.
Yep.
So we'll start reading in 2 Kings 4, verse 8.
Come on, Terry.
It says, one day Elisha went to Shunem, and a well-to-do woman was there who urged him to stay for a meal. So whenever he came by, he stopped there to eat. She said to her husband, I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God. Let's make a small room on the roof and put in it a bed and a table, a chair, and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us. We'll just stop there for a moment. The first thing I want to mention about the Shunammite woman is her lavish hospitality. She was a woman who had a very generous spirit, and sometimes I think we don't appreciate how important hospitality is. In our day and age, we have fast food restaurants, and you can get whatever you want. We're a very independent people anyway. But as you know from some of the things the guides have been telling us, hospitality was a matter of life and death.
Yep.
If you didn't get water and food, you would die, and the only way to get someplace was to walk or ride a very slow-moving vehicle or animal. And so it would take you a long time. And our guide pointed out that many of these towns that we see in ancient times that are still around, some of them, but that these sites we're going to were one day's journey apart. So it took one day to travel from one point to the next. So after one day, you need food and water. You need a resting place. So it's very important for people to offer that. And you counted on that people would offer that you could get that. And so what eventually sprang up is that became a village, or that became a town, because that was just as far as you could go before you would need some place to eat and someplace. So that the towns are spaced one day's journey apart. Now this woman, it says she was prominent. The word is prominent, well-to-do, great, wealthy, something like that. She was a woman of means, and it says she insisted he stop for a meal. She urged him to stop for a meal. And our driver was telling us how the Druze, you probably heard about the Druze, the sect that lives around here, are so hospitable. That's a very big thing in their culture. And he said every Jewish person has a Druze friend because they will not take no for an answer. They will keep inviting you and inviting you and inviting you to come to dinner until you come. And it made me think of this woman. I thought that must have been how she was, that you must come. Well, no, you must come. Until he said, of course, I'll come. I mean, what do you do? And she had that kind of spirit about her. The other thing that our driver shared that I thought was really a great little tidbit too was he's Jewish, Ronan, and I think he's Jewish.
Yes.
But anyway, he says in his family, when they break bread, it's like pita bread. It's the bread we've been eating. You tear it. You don't cut it with a knife. You tear it. So when the Bible talks about breaking bread, it's that sort of image. And they would break bread, and then you do not hand it to someone face to face. You put it on the table, and they serve themselves. Because if I break bread and hand it to you, it says that I'm providing this bread. And the Jews they would bless their bread. They would say thanks to God, but then they wouldn't hand it to you like, but I really provided this. And he says to this day, that's how they eat bread. They bless the bread, they put it on the table, and then you pick it up yourself, knowing it's from God. And I thought, what a great thing to remind us of. And I think this woman had that kind of spirit. She knew that God was the most important thing. And offering hospitality to a man of God was of high priority in her life. And of course, we know the prophets, they didn't have an easy job. The Midrash relates that the prophet would go from one mountain to another and from one cave to another. And as we've been driving around, you've seen caves, and these were the shelters. They didn't really have often a place to stay. And they were preaching the word of God, often not a very welcomed message that they had to give, but a powerful message. And they would travel from place to place wherever God sent them, wherever they were meant to speak. It must have been a very tiring job. I mean, you've seen the terrain, walking from mountain to mountain. For Elijah to come to this mountain to conquer the Baal worshipers, and go to another mountain and preach the word of the Lord. It must have been very tiring. And this is a woman who thought about the needs of the prophet. I mean, how many people were thinking about his needs? They wanted to hear a word from him. They wanted a blessing from him, no doubt. They wanted to know, what can you give to me? But apparently no one thought about, what does he need? In this way, it reminds me of Mary Magdalene that we just talked about. And that group of women who were the only group who thought about, what does Jesus need? What can we do for him? Not what can we take from him, and what will he give to us? That kind of heart. She was a woman with lavish hospitality and a generous spirit. And she received him with honor. We travel around, Mike and I, obviously, as you know, around the world and all the time. And I really appreciate those people who have that spirit of lavish hospitality and a generous spirit. And it is a gift, I think, of hospitality. I don't have it. I've tried to learn it from the people I've watched and experienced. But some people are so wonderful at it. And when you go and stay in their home, if you ever get a chance to stay with Jean Walker, you know what lavish hospitality and that generous spirit is, and you feel at home and you feel taken care of. Or if you go to Fiji and you stay at the Whitten's home, you feel taken care of, and you feel like this is just wonderful. Why would I want to go anywhere else? I think this woman had that and wanted to give that. It wasn't just enough for her to feed him a meal, give him a bed to sleep in. She said, I want to create a room for him. Where's he going to write his, messages down? How are we going to record this? He's got to have a place, a lamp, a table, a chair. She thought of everything he would need to be effective as a prophet. And no one else was thinking of that. But one of the things we learn in the scriptures over and over again, that God will use a hospitable servant.
Amen.
Whenever someone is hospitable, God will use them. And let's continue reading about this woman at verse 11. It says, one day when Elisha came, he went up to his room and sat down there. He said to his servant Gehazi, call the Shunammite. So he called her, and she stood before him. Elisha said to him, tell her, you have gone to all this trouble for us. Now what can be done for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army? She replied, I have a home among my own people. What can be done for her? Elisha asked. Gehazi said, well, she has no son, and her husband is old. Then Elisha said, call her. So he called her, and she stood in the doorway. About this time next year, Elisha said, you'll hold a son in your arms. No, my lord, she objected. Don't mislead your servant, O man of God. But the woman became pregnant, and the next year, about that same time, she gave birth to a son, just as Elisha had told her. Elisha wanted to reward this. He's sitting in his room, and he's thinking, this is so lovely. This is so nice that I have a place to sit and rest. I want to do something for this woman. It's very interesting, his interaction with her. He doesn't actually speak to her. She comes and stands before him, and he talks to Gehazi to talk to her. So I'm not sure of the protocol in prophet speaking. Maybe it was quite dangerous to have a prophet speak straight to you. I don't know. But, there seems to be an interesting protocol. But he wants to know what he can do for her, how he can reward her for what she's done, because she's bringing honor to him. So he sent Gehazi to find out. And Elisha offers to speak to the king or the commander of the army on her behalf, but she was in no need of political favors or military protection. She said, I don't need anything from these people. And so Gehazi realized, well, she has no son, and her husband's old, so, maybe she would like a son. Because I think Gehazi was probably thinking, her husband is old. She has no son. When her husband died, the land would pass to his nearest male relative. And then she would lose all she now enjoyed unless she gave birth to a son who could inherit. So Gehazi was probably thinking about these things. She never asked for a child. Elisha decided for her that he would give her a child. In fact, he rarely even speaks directly to her, but she initiates and decides and pursues this prophet of God, and we'll look at that next. And I want to look at the next bit, which I think shows her passionate persistence.
Come on, Terry.
In verse, where are we, 18? Okay. So the child grew, and one day he went out to his father, who was with the reapers. My head, he said to his father. His father told a servant, carry him to his mother. After the servant had lifted him up and carried him to his mother, the boy sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, then shut the door and went out. She called her husband and said, please send me one of the servants and a donkey, so I can go to the man of God quickly and return. Why go to him today, he asked. It's not the new moon or the Sabbath. It's all right, she said. She saddled the donkey and said to her servant, lead on. Don't slow down for me unless I tell you. So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel, where we are now. When he saw her in the distance, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, look, there's the Shunammite. Run to meet her and ask her, are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? Everything is all right, she said. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? She said. Didn't I tell you don't raise my hopes? Elisha said to Gehazi, tuck your cloak into your belt, take my staff in your hand and run. If you meet anyone, do not greet him, and if anyone greets you, do not answer. Lay my staff on the boy's face. But the child's mother said, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you. So he got up and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound or response. So Gehazi went back to meet Elisha and told him, the boy has not awakened. When Elisha reached the house, there was the boy lying dead on his couch. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Then he got on the bed and lay upon the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. As he stretched himself out upon him, the boy's body grew warm. Elisha turned away and walked back and forth in the room, and then got on the bed and stretched out upon him once more. The boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite, and he did. When she came, he said, take your son. She came in, fell at his feet, and bowed to the ground. Then she took her son and went out. This is a woman with passionate persistent.
Yes.
She had this incredible miracle in her husband's old age. Unlike Sarah, it wasn't just she wasn't old, which was quite often the case. A man was often quite a lot older than the bride he took. I mean, we think that probably Joseph was quite a lot older than Mary, and that's why he's not around later on in life when we come to see Jesus' ministry. But that was very common, that you would give a younger woman to an older man. But she had this older husband and no child. And this was a miracle. She hadn't asked for it, but God had blessed her, had given her this child. And she knew it was from God. She knew he's the one who had done it. So there was this incredible blessing. Then several years later, we don't know how old the child was, there's tragedy. Her son dies. And that verse, I mean, I know as every woman here read that verse 20, when it says, the boy sat on her lap until noon and then he died. We can just picture that. Some commentators think he went out into the fields to be with his dad. Some think that he had a heat stroke because he sang my head, and maybe he was farther out. And by this time his father was even older, however old he was, and probably couldn't get to him quickly enough, didn't know what to do. Who knows what happened? But she sat with him on her lap, and then he died in her arms. And her thought is, let me take him to the man of God's room. She put him on the bed of the man of God. She shut the door. She told her husband, I'm going to get the man of God. And he said, is there some special day? Is this like a celebration day I didn't know about? You're going to get the man of God? She said, it's all right. It's fine. Peace. It's well. And then she tells her servant, go as fast as you can and don't slow down unless I tell you. And she goes looking for Elisha. And, that phrase, it's all right, or it is well, it's a phrase that's used, it's used often about death. And I don't know if you know the story of that song we sang, when peace like a river attendeth my soul. It's a very intense story about a family, and I'm not going to fill in all the details for you, but basically they were a family, Christian family, but he was very caught up in his career and in his job, and wasn't really very involved with his family and his children. And I think he had 4 or 5, I think 5 children, and he was always working all the time, and but good family, and they decided to take a trip, a boat, and a ship, not a boat trip, but like a cruise ship, and they went to New York, and he got called back on business. He had to go. He couldn't go with the family. He had to go, and so he left them. And anyway, there was a shipwreck, and the boat sank, and if you ever get to read about it, it's quite moving to read the biographical account of this. But the mother was reaching and trying to save her children and didn't manage to save any of them. But she survived. And then, of course, the husband was distraught, thinking he'd lost all of his children, and he should have been there. He shouldn't have been so consumed with his work that he wasn't there to help. It's quite a sad story. But his wife recovered, and it created such a change in him that he wrote that song, It Is Well With My Soul, that they buried their children, and they got peace with God from that. And after that, they moved to Jerusalem. They moved here and started a school for orphans. And they had a number of other children after that. I don't remember the number. But they started their life again, and their life was centered this time in God. But but she had that peace. It's well. It's well with my soul. This is after she's held her dead child. It's well. But she's not finished. She's going to see the man of God. And so she arrives, and she's it reminded me a little bit of Abigail when she takes off, right? When she load up the donkey, I'm going. She's a woman with a purpose, and she's a woman of action. She's a righteous woman, a spiritually strong woman, even in her grief. She will go for the man of God. She will look for him. And it makes you wonder, I'm sure she had heard the stories in 1 Kings 17, verse 17 and following, about the widow of Zarephath and how Elijah had raised her son. She had probably heard that story and thought, I know a man of God. I know a prophet. I've got a dead son. It's fine. I'm going to go find him. I really think she had that kind of faith. I don't think that we have accounts of people like this that were just kind of average, right?
Yeah.
This woman is someone to be written about in God's word, and so she had that kind of faith. So I think she probably knew. Who wouldn't have known about that?
Right.
That story would have circulated over and over again. And she thought, if it happened to her, it can happen for me. And she left. And she got there and she grabbed Elisha's feet. She humbled herself, went straight for his feet. It makes you think about many women in the Bible, isn't it? There's so many similarities. And it's helpful if you think about these similarities, because it helps us know how should we be as women of God.
Yeah.
And there are similarities between the women of God.
That's right.
Who are really the faithful ones. Their persistence, their humbling themselves, going to the feet before the man of God. And Gehazi tried to push her away. Made me think about, the Canaanite woman when the disciples tried to make her go away, and the similar kind of spirit that this woman had. And he says, it's a mother's deep bitterness of sorrow that she's showing here. Her questions are that kind of sorrow that a mother suffering this kind of loss feels. Why did you give him to me if this was going to happen? I didn't ask for him, and now this is so painful. Why is this happening? Those are the things we think, aren't they? When those kinds of things happen in our lives. And Elisha immediately tells Gehazi in verse 29, tuck your cloak in your belt, because they wore long clothes, and take my staff in your hand and run. Run as hard as you can. So he was up here somewhere, where we are now, and took off running for Shiloh. He said, don't stop. If somebody greets you, don't say hello. Don't greet anybody else. Don't say hello to anyone else. Just keep running. And it shows that Elisha had that faith.
Right.
He knew, yes, Elijah did this. And what did Elisha ask for when Elijah died?
Double portion.
Double portion of what you've got, I want. So he had the faith. He thought, Elijah did it. I've got double. Yeah, go, do this. Question was, did Gehazi have that faith? That's a good question.
Yeah.
So anyway, Gehazi goes, puts his staff on the child, lays his staff on the boy's face, but nothing happened. But what does the mother do? She says, I'm not leaving you, Elisha. She knows who is the man of God. She knows which one is the one with the faith. Which one speaks for God. I know you got this little assistant here. I'm sure he's a great guy. He doesn't speak for God, and he doesn't have what you have.
Right.
And she could tell that. She was a spiritually strong and discerning woman.
Amen.
As well. So she said, I'm going with you. I'm not leaving you. So he puts the staff on and this is an interesting thought too. He puts the staff on the child, and I wonder, because you do wonder, and apparently there were debates about this for a long time, and maybe there still are. I don't know what the Jewish scholars debate about, but you're not allowed to touch a dead corpse.
Right.
Right?
That's right. Yep.
It makes you unclean.
Right.
Yeah.
So how was this going to happen? Elijah did it. so Gehazi was just going to put the staff on the child. Let me take something from Elijah and put it on him, keeping that distance. But of course we see later that Elijah puts himself eyes to eyes, face to face, mouth to mouth. He's going to touch this dead body.
Wow.
He's going to go for it completely. And this boy, if you think about it too, is lying in this upper room that she had prepared for the man of God. And this upper room is a small temple, sort of. And the bed is like an altar. And her son is on it. So many pictures this brings to mind of other situations in the Bible, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And this son is going to be reborn. And Elisha is the one who comes in as the divine presence, the one that God is with. So the boy's death and resurrection is like a Passover. It's a Passover. The angel of death has gone. And this woman, you know, she's at Elisha's feet. She's worshiping. She's thanking God. She immediately falls to his feet, bows to the ground. And, you know, it just made me think how worship and prayer are the means for this child's resurrection. This woman is a woman who honors God and worships him and prays and knows God. And that's how this child was raised. She's bowing at his feet. But worship is the means, but it's also the response. The response she has to this great thing. You know, we got to know God by seeking him and worshiping him and praying, and we got to know him, and after we get to know him, then that's our response. Now that we know him, we worship more. We should pray more. We know really who he is and what he can do. And she's worshiping in response to her son's resurrection. And that's what God's goal is for us, to worship him. And she understood that. This woman, and this is my next point, is kind of the final chapter in this woman's life. This woman is a woman of chutzpah.
Yeah.
I can't say that. Chutzpah. Ronan was trying to teach us how to say it, and I can't get the guttural quite right. But chutzpah is that determination, it's boldness, it's courage, it's nerve. She had a lot of nerve. She went straight to the source. And if you think about the heroic women in the Bible, weren't a lot of them like that? Abigail went straight to David.
Yep.
Rahab talked straight to the spies, and she asked for, you know, Deborah, straight to the battle. I mean, this is what God wants of women who worship him. He wants us to have chutzpah.
Good job, Terry.
And so if you turn with me, we'll look at the final chapter in this woman's life, which is in chapter 8. The next time we find this woman.
Come on, Terry.
So in 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 1, it says, Now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, Go away with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord had decreed a famine in the land that will last 7 years. The woman proceeded to do as the man of God said. She and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, she came back from the land of the Philistines and went to the king to beg for her house and land. The king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and had said, Tell me about all the great things Elisha has done. Just as Gehazi was telling the king how Elijah had restored the dead to life, the woman whose son Elisha had brought back to life came to beg the king for her house and land. Gehazi said, This is the woman, my lord the king, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. The king asked the woman about it, and she told him. Then he assigned an official to her case and said to him, give back everything that belonged to her, including all the income from her land from the day she left the country until now. This woman had chutzpah. Chutzpah. I haven't learned to say that yet. Here we find her, and this is her final chapter that we know about her. But God sent a 7-year famine on the land of Israel. Apparently, it was only for Israel, because when she goes to the Philistine country, there's no famine. So it was a punishment for the Israelites. You know, Elisha was probably still staying with her. He probably still came and stayed in his room on his journeys back and forth wherever he was going. But he decided to warn her of the famine. And he told her to go and live elsewhere. Now, it seems probable at this point that her husband has died, because he doesn't seem to be around. So she lived in the land of the Philistines for 7 years, and that was not very far away, while God was punishing the Israelites for their unfaithfulness to him again. But it made me think, you know, Elisha must have thought, she doesn't need to be punished.
Yeah.
God, you can punish this whole nation, and they are unfaithful, and I've been preaching at them, and I've been speaking to them, and I've been raising the dead, and I've been casting out the prophets of Baal, and I've been doing all these things, but this woman, she's faithful. I'm staying at her house. I know her. She worshiped me. She came to me. I raised her son. She had the faith to know I would do that. So he warns her, you just need to go to the next country for a while God punishes the Israelites. And then, of course, after 7 years, she returns home. And while she was away from her home and her land, it had obviously been confiscated by someone else. So this woman with chutzpah went straight to the king. She decided, somebody else is in my land? Somebody else is taking over my home? The man of God's broom? What's going on here? She went straight to the king and was going to get her land back for herself and her son. And this is King Jehoram, I think, at that time. It was her home, and it was her son's inheritance, and she was determined. She had the nerve to go ask the king for it back. I want it back. It reminded me, and then, of course, in verse 4, we find that the king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God. What a coincidence. What a coincidence. And the king had just happened to ask him at that moment, tell me some of the things that Elisha did that were, you know, some of these miracles. Tell me about how he raised the dead to life. What a coincidence. At just that moment, she walked in to see the king. Made me think of Ruth and Boaz. You know, when Ruth is in the field, it just so happened. That's what the Bible says. It just so happened that the field she was in belonged to Boaz.
Thank you,
You know,
God.
just how God does that. It just so happened that you happen to be there, and they have. And that's what's going on for this woman. It just so happened that he was there telling this story. And he has an object lesson right in front of him. The king not only returned her home and her lands, but he also gave her all the income from the land for the last 7 years. He made the squatters pay her for whatever they had made off of her land for 7 years. This woman had chutzpah. She had nerve. She had courage. She wasn't afraid. She went straight for it. You know, so often I think we're afraid, well, you know, he is the king. He is a prophet. And we think that's humility. So often we're fooled, and we fool ourselves with false humility.
There we go. Come on, Terry, help us.
That I'm just nothing. You're just wonderful. I know I'm nothing. And it's not true humility.
Amen.
True humility has courage.
That's right.
True humility is not afraid to ask, but you ask on your knees. And you ask at the feet, but you're not afraid to ask. And you're not afraid to go for it. And you're not afraid to see what can be done with the power of God. That's different.
Yeah.
Then let me just put myself down a little bit, and that'll make me look like I'm humble, or I think I'm humble. And God's like, what is that? How am I going to use you? You got to get up. Have some chutzpah.
Come on, Tess.
Be humble, but have chutzpah. You got to do it.
Humble chutzpah.
So and you know, of course, the king must have loved that story. He's telling about the raising of the dead, and here's the woman, and here's her son.
Wow.
You know, how amazing! What a great story time for the king.
Yeah.
It was just amazing.
Visual aids and everything.
So this woman's story is amazing from beginning to end.
Yeah.
You know, in blessings and trials, she's unshakable in her trust for God. Even in her emotion of grief, she's unshakable. She's going to go forward. She has that strength, that courage. She persevered and pressed her claims when she needed to. She did not sit around and whine or complain.
Amen.
While trusting in God, she confronted situations head on with courage and forthrightness. She held her own in front of God's prophet and a king.
Right.
She did not let tragedies keep her from seeking God's help with true belief in God's goodness. This woman is a great example to us as a married woman and as a single woman. She was both. As a woman who doesn't have children and a woman who does. She was both. I think God put her in our lives so that we could have chutzpah and the faith like this woman.
Amen. Amen.